Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Committee. Sorry for the delay. Today, the committee will hold a second work session on Bill 2422 and take up amendments to the Comprehensive Water Supply and Sewage Systems Plan. I want to thank all the central staff for the packets and the also, who else is here? DOT is here. There we go. My notes are wrong. Sorry. Do any of my colleagues have any opening remarks? Great. I'll pass it on to Dr. Orlin.
Good afternoon. So we're going to pick up where we left off last Monday. And the first issue, well, actually, before I say that, there are some issues that we highlighted back last week where the Planning Board made different comments to what's in the bill, and DOT largely agreed with them, and other places where the Planning Board agreed with what DOT has said. I hadn't intended on covering all of those in this meeting, or last week or this week. However, if you have time today, Park and Planning has developed a PowerPoint presentation which leads you through those issues. But again, there's no differences. I don't think there's any substantive differences, at least, between DOT, the Planning Board, and Council staff on those. So with that, let's go to the first issue where there is some differences. Issue 9, which is the target speeds. Target speeds are a concept that sort of started appearing in master plans about a decade ago. And so for every major or middling street in a master plan, it'll identify not only the limits, the classification of the road, the number of lanes, etc., but it'll also have the target speed. And what a target speed is the speed at which we would want to have traffic flowing, and that can happen through a number of ways, through the design of the road, but also in the operations of the road and enforcement. And what this bill does is to establish target speeds for each of the classifications, maximum target speeds, which means that if the target speed, say, is 35 miles per hour in the bill for a particular type, it means that the target speed could be 35, or it could be 30, it could be 25, it could be less depending on the context, but it can't be more than 35. That's an important thing to understand as we go through this. So in a few cases, there are recommended reductions in target speeds for some types of roads. Particularly, we're talking about streets in downtown areas and town center areas where there's a lot of pedestrian and bike activity, and you want to have that. However, there's a couple of concerns that I'll raise. One has to do with the classification called area connector, which in the current way of looking at things is the same thing as a minor arterial, which is a 2-lane road which carries roughly even amount of traffic that's flowing through an area, as well as 50% going to destinations along that road, to neighborhoods along that road. The speed limit on those roads today sort of depends on where you are in the county. If you're down county, they tend to be relatively low. If you're upper county, they're much higher, or somewhat higher. They range usually between 25 and 40 miles per hour. Examples are Dale Drive in Silver Spring, which had been 30 miles per hour, but as part of the effort to reduce speeding along there and make it more pedestrian bike friendly. There's not only a capital project to build sidewalks and bikeways along there, but also to do some safety improvements, and the target speed has been reduced to 25 miles per hour. However, you go further north, you get to roads like Dennis Avenue and Pliers Mill Road, where 30 miles per hour is the maximum target speed, or is the speed limit actually on the road. And you get further north, roads, and these are just examples: Old Baltimore Road, Cashel Road, Redland Road, and they're all posted at 35 miles an hour. And my point here is, like, one size doesn't really fit all. You want to make sure there's the ability to set the target speed given the context. What is being proposed is that the target speed, the maximum target speed for all area connectors should be 25 miles per hour, which frankly I don't think is realistic. It doesn't fit the design of the road. It doesn't fit the context in terms of ped bike activity, particularly for up-county areas. So my recommendation is to set the maximum target speed for area connectors at 35, which would give you the flexibility, as DOT has done with Dale Drive, to reduce the effective speed that is desired down to lower than 35 in those circumstances. And even in a few places where you have area connectors which are 40 miles per hour speed limit, this would still then restrict those to get down to 35. So that's my first recommendation.
Any thoughts on that?
I'd like to hear from.
Yep, please.
Great.
Planning,
For the record, Steve Aldridge from Countywide Planning, Montgomery Planning. First comment I'd like to make is in the staff report it refers to these target speeds as interim, and they're only interim in the sense that when the translations occur, they can be changed with the next update to the master plan of highways. But the target speeds are actually they're more fixed. They won't go away when the master plan of highways is updated. They will be target speeds that will continue to exist in the code and be used. I think the second point is that if you look at most of the proposed area connectors, most of them are minor arterials, most of them are in more densely developed neighborhoods, streets like Dale Drive, streets like Sangamore Avenue, and Flower Avenue, and that 25 is the target speed that we're going to want to see on the vast majority of these streets. We do recognize that there are some minor arterials where, having a range might be useful, but we feel like setting a target speed as high as 35, just doesn't suit the typical minor arterial today. We'd be more comfortable with a range of 25 to 30, or our going in position, which was actually the position of the Complete Streets Design Guide, was 25 for this type of street.
I guess I would take issue that most of these minor arterials are down county. I don't believe that's the case. I think there's several that are, but there are many, many that are not. And again, it doesn't fit the context of the middle of the upper county to have a 25 mile per hour speed limit. It won't be enforceable. People won't be driving it anyway, even with as much stuff as you do. I remember in the 90s there was actually an exercise where the police department asked DOT to raise speed limits because 85-90% of the people were exceeding the speed limit by more than 10 miles per hour, and they had no way of enforcing it. So yes, we do want to clamp down as much as possible on speeds and do what we can to reduce speeds. We're in areas where it makes sense to do so, but to basically say that these roads up county, and again, I don't believe this is a small minority. I think it's actually maybe at least half are not in the down county. I think 35 miles is the right number, and it allows the flexibility for master plans, or the master plan update, for master plans that are updated before the master plan of highways is done, to set a different target speed. This is basically the maximum target speed that would be allowed under the code. You can certainly go lower, and we should have it should be context sensitive, and 25 miles per hour just is not.
I guess I'd like to sort of counter in that if you set the target too high, it will be difficult to get it lower, and having a target speed that's lower doesn't necessarily ensure that we can lower the speed tomorrow. DOT has a very defined process for determining posted speed limits, regardless of the target speed that's identified, and if they cannot do certain physical and operational measures to get the safe operating speed down to the target speed, they won't post it there. So it is a goal, which again, we see that consistent with master plan visions. And if you set that goalpost too high, you won't achieve results. And I think the key is that this isn't a down county, up county issue. This is largely a neighborhood versus more arterial throughput issue. Streets that have much more arterial throughput, some of those will likely end up with higher operating speeds because there's not the traffic calming effect of neighborhoods and a lot of crossings and things like that. Streets like Redland Road, as an example, a section of that, it's going to be hard to get traffic down to 25 miles an hour. But there are other, and Greencastle Road, I think, would be another example of that. But there are plenty of areas outside of inside the Beltway where, for instance, several of the roads in the Olney area, where 25 is, whether Prince Philip or Queen Elizabeth, 25 is pretty much what the speed limit should be on those roads. So I think having a range just gives us a lot more flexibility, and it sets a low bar for the more densely developed streets where we have definitely, I would say, Vision Zero concerns.
But setting it at 25 doesn't give you a range. It says that everything has to be 25 or lower.
I suggested that a range maybe of 25 to 30.
Well, but what's the point of having a range? This is a maximum target speed. So what does that mean, have a maximum target speed that's in a range? You set a number, and you say that's the maximum. It can be less than that. And everywhere else in the code, it's a max, except for country roads and rustic roads. It's a range.
Yeah, a range is provided, for instance, for country connectors, and I think the reason that was done in the guide and transferred again into the proposed code changes is because there was a definite recognition that, I mean, we heard a lot through our public involvement process, especially from folks around the Darnestown area, is that some of the streets are actually residential streets, but they're in the country area, and so certainly some sections of particular roads should have lower speeds, much like any other residential street. So having some degree of flexibility, which I think we found that in the country area, it made a lot of sense. It could make a lot of sense here as well.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Michael Paylor. I'm the Chief of Traffic Engineering and Operations. Interesting and robust discussion. I think we're talking about a couple of things here. For one, when we talk about target speeds, it's going to be and is incredibly difficult to get those target speeds on existing facilities. So our existing network is what it is. We certainly have tools that we use in our toolbox to try to accomplish that measure, but it is a challenge, and at the risk of incriminating ourselves, sometimes it's nearly impossible to get those target speeds in now. And so when we're talking about this target speeds in the context of this complete streets design guide and this discussion here, for new roads, it may be very much appropriate to establish these lower speeds, because if you're building a new road, you want to make sure you build it towards certain tolerances so that you can ensure that the network is going to reflect the speeds that you want folk to travel at. And as such, if we established a lower target speed in the context of what my colleague is suggesting, that really isn't going to substantially negatively affect what's going on in the existing network. We're still going to try to apply our traffic safety and traffic calming techniques on all of our existing roadways, but this seems to be more in line with trying to address future roads, and then perhaps even some roads that by virtue of some of the techniques that we have may be changed. But
Right. So I would think advocates of planning might say, well, what's the harm of doing this, since it's not going to affect your current roads. Nobody's going to get pulled over for violating a maximum target speed now. What would be the harm at following their proposal?
you mean following the higher speed?
The lower.
The lower, nothing, and that's
Okay.
that's what I'm advocating.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Tim, Andrew, anybody? Said it well? Okay. Glenn?
What's the committee's recommendation?
We don't have one yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
You haven't missed anything. Hans?
Thank you, Mr. Paylor. So I just wanted to also hear from others at DOT. What would you think about the 25 to 30? Do you feel like this 25 is sufficient to cover the various locations?
I mean, we collaborated on the bill. That's what the executive's recommendation was. We transmitted it that way.
None of those specific roads to you jumped out as, oh, whoops, we didn't think about this?
Well, I mean, the challenge is the classification of the roads. We proposed, a default transition to roadway classification. Ultimately, that will be looked at in greater detail through the master plan updates, the master plan of highways. That's planning's job, is classification. And so while it's a default for the time being, it is going to have another look at. And through the classification, if there is a context where perhaps a higher target speed might make sense for a particular context, it can be addressed in the classification of the road at that time.
Can it, though? I mean, doesn't this rule mean that you can't do anything different?
No, I think what is specified in a lot of the changes is that if the target speed, the maximum target speed applies unless it is otherwise specified in a functional plan, master plan, sector plan, sort of, et cetera. So a master plan does have the ability to do something different per existing code and per these changes that are proposed.
And you all decide what's an area connector, right? If something, right. I thought that was your point.
Precisely.
Right. You could just say, this is not an area connector from now on, right? Then we're in a different, okay.
So this is a tough conversation, right? Because we all know where we need to go, and it's having slower cars, right? So that people are driving more mindfully, they're not speeding, and we have fewer incidents on our roadways. And I think we're all, and I'll include you in this, trying to grapple with how we achieve those goals. And on one hand, as has been noted, simply lowering the speed limits does not necessarily mean people will drive slower. There are other ways to help enforce that, not only law enforcement, and whether it is even law enforcement or the Department of Transportation, should certain legislation in Annapolis be approved, transferring some of those responsibilities. Then also you have the speed cameras, right? That is an automated mode of enforcing. I'm not shy in saying we need more speed cameras. I think that is a simple way of helping moderate, regardless of whatever the speed limit might be. But the reality, again, is that not all of these roads are the same. I'm curious, as you were talking about the different sections, some of them are purely residential. Are other ones, as you go, as Dr. Olin was referencing, the divide between down county, mid county, and up county, as you travel throughout parts of the county, are some of them more commercial or more rural? Can we talk about the different nature and how people would use them differently?
It depends. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It really depends on the road. I mean, I can't remember whether this is Steve or someone else mentioned some of the minor arterials that are or area connectors that are within Albany. Those are residential, and so maybe 25 miles per hour will be an appropriate target speed for that, which again can be accommodated if the maximum target speed is 35. You can set it at a lower number. But a place like Cashel Road or Redland Road north of the Shady Grove area, where it's pretty wide open, there may be scattered houses along it, but very little in the way of pedestrian bike activity. The design of the road is such that it'd be extremely difficult to drive 25 miles per hour. The car almost won't let it go 25 miles an hour. You probably had that experience. So I think, again, to allow the context to come into play, I think you set a maximum limit which says, okay, it can't be any higher than this, but it can be lower. And I think there are plenty of places where 35 miles per hour is a safe speed given the context, and a lot of places where it's not, where you can set a lower speed. But you can't do it the other way around. If you set it at 25 or even 25 to 30, again, the range doesn't make much sense in the context of the law. The law says the maximum. What does it mean to see a maximum between 25 and 30? It's kind of meaningless. You set a number. And so
Well, wouldn't having a range for a maximum create the built-in acknowledgement that not all the roads are the same, that there should be some differences?
I think the fact that it just says maximum suggests that it can be lower.
Well,
Otherwise it would just say the target speed is.
I would interpret the range to be a recognition that some should be 30, have a speed limit of 30, and some could go up to 35, and yet some others could be 20 or 25. Is my interpretation of the bill, is that correct?
That's the way I would interpret
Dr.
it. But if you want to get the word maximum out of the law,
I hear you.
maybe then you could have a range.
One partial answer I can give is that when we did the Complete Streets Design Guide, we didn't identify the target speeds with maximums. In fact, they're not even identified whether they're minimums, defaults, maximums. I think the intention was that they were defaults. Typically, that would be the speed that would be applied.
So, Andrew Boston, Montgomery County DOT. If I'm understanding it correctly, I believe that the choice is either you have the maximum at 35 or at 25. Eventually, in the long term, the master plans, sector plans, functional plans, they can set it whatever they locally want each road to be. So your Dennis Avenue can be 25 or 30. Your 7 Locks could be 30 or 35. I think you're just trying to figure out what happens until those master plans set those specific individual numbers. Whether you want it to be a maximum of 35, or if you want to go to a maximum of 25, that kind of sends the message of Vision Zero. That's where a lot of this really came from, is the Vision Zero angle of, if you recall last week, I had that slide that showed every 5 miles per hour increase, you have reduced field of vision, you have higher stopping distance, and you have just a bigger risk of fatality injury the faster people are going. That's where this is all reflecting. I think in the long run, we can tailor things to each street. It's just until we have those plans to set that individual numbers, do we want the sort of Vision Zero centric message of 25 or the more mobility, and I recognize there's a need for that in some of these streets, mobility message of 35. And I think we could get to whatever we need over time.
And I have one more comment, which is that since most of these streets, in fact, all of these streets are currently minor arterials, we did a master plan update to the master plan highways in 2018. And at that time, the target speeds were set in the master plan of highways for minor arterials at 25 miles per hour. So, because that's a functional plan, whatever we set here would not override those.
Sure. I appreciate the spirited conversation.
Can I suggest a compromise? I mean, if folks are uncomfortable with the concept of a maximum, just eliminate the word maximum there. It's just the target speed, and then you can set a range.
Well,
And-
I'm actually quite comfortable with the word, and I understand the origin of this legislation and the negotiations that took place between planning and Department of Transportation, recognizing, as was just said, that Vision Zero is the goal that's been in mind. And I think through this conversation, I am comfortable with the flexibility that the legislation or the bill would provide to set some of these roads at 20, 25, 30, or 35, depending on the unique characteristic of those roads. And I'll support the original legislation.
Me too.
Great, that's 3.
The next item is also this issue of target speeds. Thank you. Next issue is also this issue of target speeds having to do with neighborhood connectors, which is the new term for what have been called primary residential streets. Primary residential streets are the streets that carry some through traffic, but it's a minority of its through traffic. Most of it is bringing people from the edge of the neighborhood to their local street. The local streets in the bill calls for a maximum target speed of 20 miles an hour, and there was a big push, as you know, from you all and from in Annapolis, to be able to set the speeds in neighborhoods to less than 25, which used to be the default. And so on what used to be called secondary residential streets, or even yield streets, which are the streets that have parking on both sides or on one side, but only has one travel lane where a car coming one direction has to actually pull into the parking lane to let the other one pass. The proposal is that they be set at 20 miles per hour. The bill calls for primary residential streets, or the new neighborhood connectors, to be 25 miles per hour. However, their planning board in its recommendations are saying that should be reduced to 20 as well. Again, the primary residential streets, because it's carrying some through traffic, it's also the entry point usually for emergency equipment. Of course, they can travel at the speed they want, I suppose. It just makes sense to keep that at a slightly higher speed than the local streets, the very local streets. Also, we'll talk about speed humps later, but we have a policy for the last 25 years that on a primary residential street, we have speed humps which are called flat top speed humps, which are the ones that are 22 feet wide, and they come up and then they're flat for about 10 feet and they come back down again, and oftentimes you'll see pedestrian crosswalks in them. But on the local streets, they're parabolic. They're only 12 feet wide. They're more severe. You can safely travel over a primary residential street, on a primary street and a speed hump there at 25 and a local street at 20. So my recommendation is to keep as what it says in the bill, that the neighborhood connectors have a maximum target speed of 25. And again, it's a maximum, so if we're leaving the word maximum in, I suppose in some contexts you could go lower than 25. But to not set it higher, because if it's higher, then there are going to be some neighborhoods, again, where it's just totally, it makes little sense compared to the local roads into its context.
All right, so again, the recommendation is target speed at 20, and Glenn is saying, just say maximum 25, is that boiling
The
it
difference
down?
is, the bill says maximum 25, the planning board recommends basically a maximum of 20
Okay,
for these primary residential streets, now called neighborhood connectors.
all right, well, I think 20 is plenty, as they say.
How many examples? Weller Road is a primary residential street. Let's name a few so they get a context.
Yeah,
Steve?
a few real streets here would be helpful.
Bushy Drive,
Bushy Drive.
Weller Road. I'm thinking around where I live, so.
Yeah, sure.
I think portions of Seminary Road, headed up towards Metropolitan, is a primary residential.
I'm drawing a blank of yours right now, but there's a lot of them.
There are a lot of them.
How would this, what do we have in this code for neighborhood, like interior neighborhood streets?
20 miles per hour.
20 miles per hour.
20. So this would be consistent with those, basically. It's okay. Well, I'm good with it.
Okay.
For what? I didn't get
As drafted with the planning board draft, or the
Well, the DOT is 25.
consensus draft. What's
The
that?
bill, the bill is 25. Right. So it's 25?
Help.
Okay,
What
for
is
the
it?
record,
25 or 20? Just finish.
Jason Sartori with the planning board. So the bill was introduced as 25, but the planning board's recommendation was to lower that to 20. So
Right.
With MCDOT
No.
in agreement.
We actually pitched that as well as part of that planning board recommendation. We agree with 20 miles per hour.
Right. So, I agree with
All right. 20.
planning and DOT.
That's unanimous. Okay. Good luck. Finally, the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee points out that the target speeds for country roads have a range of 20 to 35 miles per hour, but the rustic roads in the bill have no target speed, and suggests a range of 20 to 35 for those roads as well. What I'm suggesting is that again, I was dealing with the maximum for country roads should be 35, top of the range. You can always go lower, but the maximum for rustic and exceptional rustic should be 30, recognizing that those are usually lower speed roads than the country roads are. And by country roads, we're not talking about major roads. We're talking about sort of basically the local roads within the ag reserve or other very low density areas, which don't happen to be rustic roads. So that's my recommendation, to go with a maximum target speed of 35 for country roads and 30 for rustic and exceptional rustic roads.
And what was in the legislation and again?
The legislation does not have a recommendation for rustic, exceptional rustic roads, none. For country roads, it gives a range of 20 to 35.
And yeah, Steve Aldridge for the record. Since we were focused on changes to the Complete Streets Design Guide, and we knew that the Rustic Roads Functional Plan was going to be ongoing as we were working on this, we tend to leave that to the Rustic Roads folks. When the recommendations were made through the comments, they actually seem quite reasonable. And certainly DOT can respond to that as well. I think I would be comfortable with either the maximum or the range. And it would then be a tool that the rustic roads functional master plan could then set target speeds, because that's not something that we intentionally were planning on doing with this. This would actually set interim speeds, which fortunately the rustic roads functional plan could look at it almost immediately and decide if they're appropriate or not.
Again, Tim Couples with DOT, I think, yeah, we recognize there was this other effort going on, and then also achieving the target speed on a rustic road. We didn't want to get into that until the master planning process was complete, because there's limitations on, you have to preserve the nature and character of a rustic road, and sometimes some of the treatments, your toolbox isn't as big, again, on that rustic road. And so that's why we didn't get into it in the bill. We think there's an opportunity, to address it concurrently almost with this. But we're comfortable with that range of target speeds for those type of roads.
I'm okay with the maximum language there.
So I'm sorry, could you repeat that again, Mr. Glass? Sorry.
Well, so the question was whether or not there would be a range or the maximum. I think they both serve the same purpose there, and so I'm fine with the maximum.
What is functionally the difference? Because if you have a maximum, that implies a range, doesn't it? However, if the maximum were 20, there is no range, correct? But
Right.
in the alternative, the maximum's 35,
Yeah,
you have a range.
I think in this situation, because one, we're not, we only add rustic roads and exceptional rustic roads through the functional planning process, and the target speeds can be set based on context. That either one works.
But functionally, it's the same, right? Sorry, I went to
What-
Jesuit school. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
What was the proposed language in the legislation? Is it the range or the word maximum?
For country road, it's a range, 20 to 35. For rustic roads and exceptional rustic roads, there's nothing said about what the target speed would be.
Got it. Well, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I'll take the original language in the proposed legislation of the range, and then let's have the maximum for that secondary classification.
For the rustic roads and exceptional rustic roads.
Sure.
So the maximum would be 30?
Okay, so
For exceptional, I understand what you're saying about country roads. I'm trying to get straight what it is for
Distinction without a difference. Is it the
correct.
maximum
So
35?
that's why I was right.
maximum
Range of
30.
maximum.
Glenn wants to lower the maximum from 35 to 30 on exceptional rustic roads, if I'm understanding correctly. That's really the only difference.
The law doesn't right now, the bill doesn't say anything about what the target speed would be. So I'm not really lowering it, I'm just saying I would set it as a maximum of 30.
You're proposing setting it at 30.
Proposing.
As a max.
Right. I'm proposing a maximum of 30. You could go lower in this
You're an
plan.
expert on many things, and you're especially an expert on rustic roads. So knowing many of them are narrow and hilly, I'm comfortable with staff recommendation on that one.
But the draft that we received recommended a range of 20 to 35, right?
For country roads, but not for,
There was nothing for.
nothing
Right.
for rustic roads.
I see.
Yeah, if you look at the bill, it's on.
So I think what I'm hearing is that keeping country roads at the range of 20 to 35, but then any rustic or exceptional rustic road setting a maximum of 30.
Take me home.
I think so.
Take me home.
All right.
Without exception.
Okay, and that's unanimous? Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, got it. Okay, enough of the target speeds. On page 3 now, sidewalk exemptions. There's a section of the law which address waivers where DOT and development projects, 2 different sections, deal with where sidewalks can be, requirements can be waived. However, this is more of a technical thing. Section 29A of the Chapter 49 would seem to apply to either type. It reads, bikeways and sidewalks must be constructed when any county road is constructed, reconstructed, or relocated, and then it lists the exceptions. What I'm suggesting is that section, which really deals with roads that are built by DOT, not by developers as a condition of subdivision, that we changed the language to say the county must construct bikeways and sidewalks when it is constructing, reconstructing, or relocating a county road. That clearly means that we're talking about now the county is the actor building something. It's a project you would approve in the CIP, for example. And then there's a subsection 5 under that particular part of the law, which would allow DPS to waive the requirement for a bikeway or sidewalk of a CIP project if it were not to connect to any destination in the foreseeable future. It's not DPS's role to permit projects that are built by DOT. It's DOT's role. So on the face of it, it's just not appropriate to have that language. The planning board also recommended getting rid of that language. So that's my recommendation, is to, again, change the Part A there to what's bolded in the middle of page 3, and then delete this subsection 5 that allows DPS to do the waiver, because again, it's not their authority to do it in that case. It is their authority to do so in cases where it's a redevelopment and a permit has to be given to a developer.
For the record, Atik Panshiri, I'm the public right-of-way manager at DPS. We have no objection and support the modification.
You don't? Great. That makes
We have
things
no
easy.
role in CIP projects, so
Right.
that's why.
Go ahead. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. The next item is the same, is Part B on the middle of page 3. Current law allows DPS to waive the requirement for a developer to build a sidewalk or a bikeway for several reasons. The planning board would add one more exemption, which is if the board establishes criteria to accept payment in lieu of an improvement. DPS concurs with that, and council staff does as well. So again, DPS could waive the requirement to build a sidewalk if the planning board sets up criteria where in some cases they might require payment into a fund that would build a sidewalk perhaps elsewhere where it's more needed than at that particular location.
Okay.
Okay.
We're okay with that.
And then the last item under the section where there is a difference, the planning board recommends an amendment that would not allow DPS to waive the requirement for a sidewalk or bikeway if it were a condition of a development approval. DPS opposes the amendment, noting that there are very few sidewalks or bikeways that it waives annually, but that they are the ultimate authority on giving permits. I agree with DPS, but there should be in the law, I think, a requirement that DPS first consult with planning staff to get their input before they make a decision as to whether or not to waive a sidewalk, which again doesn't happen very often.
So yes, as Dr. Orling suggested, this is one where we disagree. Our feeling here is that when the planning board makes a decision of improving a development project and includes a set of conditions, and those are all included in the resolution, that is a legally binding document that the applicant must abide by. And if they don't do all the things that are met, all the conditions that are met in that approval, if they're not meeting the conditions, then that's what was required in order for them to get that approval. So if, as they are building this, they come upon something and they realize, wow, this is not feasible, we didn't think that this was the case, and rather than having DPS waive that requirement, they should be required to come back to the planning board to amend the resolution, to amend their application, and get a new approval that doesn't require that, and then the planning board can require the fee in lieu. It's just, we feel like that's just a better process. Applications come back before the planning board all the time with amendments, and so it would just be, that's what we would require under what we're suggesting is just completely striking Section A from Part A from Section 49-40.
Again, Atik Panshiri with DPS. We object the amendment that was recommended by the planning board. We do have the authority right now, the existing law authorized DPS to make the waiver. And just for the record, we don't do it very often. It's not the major development that we waive the sidewalks or back lanes. It's for infills. Yeah, we do this study. This is not a planning stage. This is during construction. People invest their money, resources, finding out, and they come back and say, okay, this is really does not lead into anything. There's no sidewalks anywhere within the half a mile or 2 miles or 1 mile radius, there's no schools, there's no bus stops. There could be obstacles. To build one frontage, one lot, sidewalk, you have to cut down major trees. You may have to build retaining walls, things like that. It's really time consuming for them to go back to the planning board and then get the approval. What we do is we get a fee in lieu of. So what we do is we pass the fee to DOT or the sidewalk program to build a sidewalk somewhere that's more appropriate. The tendency for the sidewalk building that leads to nowhere, let's say a kid or somebody on a wheelchair is using the sidewalk to get in there, and all of a sudden it's a dead end, doesn't go anywhere. A kid, what they do is they don't go back. They jump on the roadway. It's a safety concern. So these are the things that we do study. When you look at it, I have looked at the record, and every year probably we waive 2 or 3 sidewalks that leads to nowhere. It's not like that we are waving everywhere. However, with the spirit of cooperation with Park and Planning or Planning Board, I do support the recommendation by Dr. Olin that we consult with Planning Board staff. But we are objecting to sending it back to Planning Board to do reevaluation, and they have to approve it. And the fact that we do have the authority right now, and it's within the executive branch that they have to have some say in this.
$2 to $3 a year.
This year we have done 3.
3. What's the average over the last 10 years, do you think?
I would say if we average it, probably it would be about between, I hope I'm not wrong, it's maybe about 5 in the last 10 years. If
5
you
in the
average
last 10 years.
then 10 years. Yeah. Average
5 per
5.
year for
5
10
per
years
year.
on the average.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And why do you think it's so onerous to go before the planning board? Certainly people complain about a requirement like that, but Mr. Sartori is right that does happen all the time, right?
At time is one thing that they have to go back to the planning board. It's not going to the planning board staff, it goes to the planning board. And how often do planning boards meet?
Every week.
And it's to get on the schedule. It's really time consuming and takes time. So that's my recommendation, that we support what Dr. Orlan is recommending, that we consult with planning board staff, but just to send it out right to the planning board.
So
We object.
many years ago, when I was a journalist on Capitol Hill, I covered the Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska. But I'm curious to know, well, I know what that project was. What is a sidewalk to nowhere? How do you define a sidewalk that goes nowhere?
Well, currently, my experience is that the planning board, when they have, let's say they have an infill, 80-foot frontage, it's required to build a sidewalk. But the sidewalk does not go anywhere. There's no connection to another sidewalk. So the sidewalk is sitting there for 80 feet, and that's it. And until the DOT has a project to build the sidewalk in that region, make the connection, God knows how long that will be, 50 years?
Well,
And that
so-
sidewalk will be torn up.
So I appreciate you sharing and allowing us to visualize what you're talking about, because I've seen those. We've all seen those. Is it the expectation that the area should have sidewalks, and so while there is construction going on, that the developer or the project could install the sidewalk with the hope and expectation that the rest will come?
Maybe the planning board will, staff will respond to that, but
Yeah,
my experience is
probably
that
better
this
off.
is a default language, and every infills, every small project that comes in, goes to Park and Planning, they require a sidewalk.
Got it.
Regardless of the study, whether to say, go do the study, which costs money, at that stage, they are not ready to do the full study because they don't have funding or they don't have money. But when they come to construction, that's where they are allocating their resources to
Got it.
do the study.
So, Mr. Sartori, DPS is curious as to why sidewalks are being required to be installed if they don't go to anywhere.
Sure. Well, I would say actually just earlier this year, I'm looking at the date on this, on March 3rd of 2022, the planning board adopted a policy that basically outlined in situations where we have de minimis projects of 2 or 3 units, or the infill types of that Mr. Panchiri is explaining. We set limits, and we set you need to meet certain criteria before we would ever require that of you. So now, hopefully, we're having fewer and fewer of these where we're requiring an excessive burden on the infill project to build these sidewalks. The other thing I would say, going back to the way this language is written in here now, and they're correct, it's in the code today, and what's proposed here is just one little minor change of adding the word bikeways, but there's nothing in here that says that this authority to accept this, for DPS to be able to waive this, applies only to infill projects or small projects of de minimis size. And so the concern is that there is the ability, as the code is written, to, even for larger projects, to waive that. And those conditions that are put on those approvals are really based on a kind of an understanding that we're getting certain things from the developer, and in exchange, here's what you need to do. And if those conditions change, the question is, would some of the other conditions change if we knew we weren't going to get the sidewalks? So, post hoc, it's kind of difficult for those changes to be made, and that's why we prefer for it to always come back before and go back through the normal approval process for an amendment if there's a change that is desired later on in the process.
I'm wondering whether or not the section we just finished talking about before this, which basically allows DPS to waive the requirement if the planning board were to establish criteria to accept payment in lieu of an improvement, whether or not this could apply here as well. I mean, if DPS says that they're not going to permit the sidewalk along here, but it would come with a condition that they have to make a payment, however that's set up, which would go into a pot of money to build a sidewalk where it's more useful, where it does connect with an existing sidewalk, perhaps even in the same neighborhood. I don't know how specific you want to get, but it seems to me that would be an elegant way out of this. But I'm not sure how, and I don't know what, I haven't talked to the planning staff or DPS staff about this, so I don't know whether that makes sense.
Just for the record, I have gone back about 20 years looking at our records. Did not see any project major project that we have waived the sidewalk without planning board's approval. All our records shows that we either denied because there was sidewalk was needed, or sidewalk was waived because of a small 1-2 lot projects. But we have not waived any in our records that it was a major project.
Dr. Orland, your suggestion sounds like a good plan to me. Mr. Sartori, how's that sound?
Okay, we'll come up with some language on that.
Consultation department?
Tied to improvement.
No, more than that they submit a payment in lieu, so we get a sidewalk in a more sensible place.
Do you know when this is actually going to happen? Is it in development right now, the establishing criteria to accept payment in lieu?
We have those. Those are established, and some of those are included as part of, LHR, but also this policy that we've implemented in terms of the de minimis projects, that we're not going to require the frontage improvements.
Okay.
So
we'll see. We'll see what we can work out given this direction.
Great.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes also the conditions will state, that that make reference to potential changes that may come. So we can even add some flexibility on a case-by-case basis in those conditions that are part of the resolution of approval for an application. So we can also utilize that.
Okay.
I hope that we will consider environmental impact as well when we requiring sidewalk that leads to nowhere or connects to nowhere.
Right, but you agree you'd rather have a sidewalk where it makes sense, where there's connectivity, and you'd rather have them avoid going back to the planning board, correct?
Right now, I oppose going back to the planning board, or we don't agree to it, but with the planning board staff, I have no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So again, my takeaway from this, tell me if I'm wrong, is we're going to try and look for language that would basically have it so that if DPS decides to waive a sidewalk, that there needs to be money collected from that developer to go into the same fund that the planning board's talking about under Part B, and it could be used for building sidewalks elsewhere, preferably somewhere else in that same neighborhood, but as close as possible. Okay, the next issue is speed humps, and there's, we already talked about the different types of speed humps there are, so I won't go through that again. But to point out that the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee is recommending that, back up just for a second. Right now, speed humps are only
Sorry,
allowed.
go ahead. I want to go back to that previous one before.
Oh, sorry.
I recall that in a previous road code, we said that new development will always have a sidewalk requirement, even though there are neighborhoods where there are no sidewalks. So is the consequence of what we just did that if you were doing a new house in a neighborhood where there are no sidewalks, normally today DPS probably would waive you out of the requirement, and now you're going to have to pay $20,000 to get out of the requirement that DPS would otherwise have waived you out of?
Well, and so when that would come through the planning board under the policy that we have in place for de minimis, they probably would be exempt from having to make that improvement. And so we have a calculation of a kind of a
De minimis distance?
yes, it's a fee in lieu calculation, but it's not a full, what do we say, partial payment. So they wouldn't have to pay for the full replacement. So the policy we have in place is actually kind of good for those situations. They'll have to pay for something, but not the full amount.
But isn't that a different criteria for development, equity, and things like that we discussed months ago? This is not, that policy does not talk about infills, single-family homes, 1 or 2 lots. They're mostly talking about equity on development projects or commercial. So that is, in my opinion, that's a different issue than this one.
Yeah, I'm really talking about the single-family lot, probably the infill. Neighborhood has no sidewalks. As a result, it's not going to get them unless the county comes in and does them all together. Single property is being done. Today, you can waive them. I don't know how often that happens. Maybe it's not happening, so it doesn't matter. This is a non-existent problem. I just didn't want to cause us to institute a very large fee for something that we would not say is reasonable. So if it doesn't sound like that's a real concern, then I'll withdraw my highlighting.
It's not a concern to us, but apparently planning board does have a concern, but which, in our opinion, we don't agree with them. We do have the authority, and it's during construction, it's not planning. A lot of things pops up and shows up that it becomes an obstacle. For a wheelchair, ADA guidelines, some of the sidewalks, one does not meet. Let's say it's an 8%, 10% slope. How do you build a sidewalk for a wheelchair? So these are the concerns that we do have. And the planning board, looking from top view, not three-dimensional, that sometimes does not see it. But when it comes during construction, we do see those things. And that's a concern.
The decision we just made was that you can waive them and you can apply the fee, but you don't have to. Is that?
I think we'd have it that they would have to pay a fee
Right.
into a fund that would build sidewalks where they are more feasible and more useful right now.
I think our concern really is with just the way that this is in here right now. There's nothing that distinguishes. Our concern is when the planning board has made a decision and approves a project
Right.
and sets a condition that they need to build something. There should not be a way for them to not have to build that without going back to revise those conditions. And so projects that are approved through other processes can follow a different process, and we've got things in place for projects with 5 or fewer residential units, projects with 3 or fewer residential units, and what will require a de minimis payment as opposed to having to build something. But when the planning board actually puts in a condition that says you need to build this on your frontage, they should have to do that. And if something comes up and it's not feasible, then they should come back and explain that to the board, and the board would then redo the resolution and change the conditions of approval.
And that's where we are objecting to that, because it's not, the executive branch should have a say when it's more logically makes sense. And it's just, at this point, I don't see that. We do get fee in lieu of. It's not that we are waiving it outright.
I appreciate Councilmember Brewer bringing us back, because I think it's even more clear what the conundrum here is, in that if a property, if let's say a building was approved and they're supposed to have sidewalks, and DPS determines that those sidewalks might be sidewalks to nowhere, and you say you don't need them anymore, then planning has a project where they approve sidewalks, the developer doesn't have to build the sidewalks, and now there are no sidewalks, yet there's no remedy to encourage more sidewalks in that area. And what was just approved and might be up for reconsideration was at least to say, if that process bears out, that at least money would then be put into a sidewalk fund so sidewalks could be built somewhere, because I know the consensus here is that we want more sidewalks and are willing to do whatever we have to do to get more sidewalks. Is that an accurate take?
I agree.
I'm asking too many people to get unanimous yes, but yes, I'm seeing head nods.
The existing law does give the authority to DPS to get waiver and fee in lieu of. So it's not we are waiving it outright and say no fee. We only waive it when we get the fee.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
Okay. Are you satisfied?
I'm good. I'm satisfied.
Okay, great. We can move on. Nothing's changed. That was consensus. We have consensus around your proposal, Dr.
Consensus is that we want to be able to collect money
Correct.
when.
Pay or play.
Right, okay.
Right.
All right, so the next item is the speed hump program. We've talked about this again. And the law does allow for speed humps to go in where they haven't been allowed before. Up till now, it's just been on primary residential streets, secondary residential streets, and minor arterials to some degree. This would allow it to be also used on downtown streets and in town center streets where there's a lot of pedestrian bike activity. The Rustic Roads Advisory Committee is recommending that they also be allowed on rustic and exceptional rustic roads because they've cited some reports of excessive speeding. I'm not recommending that. The idea of what the Rustic Roads program is, and I point out I was actually on the original task force that created it 35 years ago, was that this is essentially a historic preservation program for certain roads. And it's supposed to actually retain as much as possible the nature of the roads as they are without modernizing them, without straightening them, without making them do all kinds of other improvements which are not historically part of that road. Speed humps is certainly not part of that. I think there may be other ways of being able to control speed than speed humps. And frankly, there's no difference between rustic and exceptional rustic roads and country roads, except that rustic and exceptional rustic roads have these particular characteristics that make them seem more rustic, or historically they're more important. And there's no recommendation that there be speed humps on country roads either. So I do not recommend extending the program to include changing the law to allow speed humps to be put on rustic or exceptional rustic roads.
Okay. You agree?
Andrew Boston, Montgomery County DOT. We disagree with council staff's recommendation, and we do agree with the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee for these rustic roads. There's two big issues here. Speed humps, they're not strictly reflective of the agricultural character and rural origins of rustic roads, but of course rustic roads traditionally are probably better known as potholed, rutted gravel streets that we really don't have much of today anymore. I think speed humps are more that modern take on that condition. That used to slow traffic. Now we're trying to use a modern take on that to also slow traffic. But really the reason where this differs from country roads is you have these sudden surprises when you're on a rustic road. You can have a sudden curve, or there could be a one-lane portion, or you could approach a ford and not the car, but the stream crossing. That kind of surprise, we don't really have those on country roads because they're a little bit more deliberately engineered. Whereas on rustic roads, those are your protected features. Speed humps, we're not going to go out and put speed humps on every single rustic road. This is just trying to give us the option. We've mentioned toolbox a number of times. It's that option in our toolbox for where we have those conditions where we think a speed hump could work to slow people down approaching that sudden curve. That's an option we can put in there when it needs to be there.
I guess what I would say is, I think DOT should treat this road like they would any other road. If there's a road which has a sudden surprise, to use your language, you put up a sign. If you're approaching a one-lane bridge, you put up a sign, one-lane bridge ahead. If you're at a tight curve, you put up a speed limit sign, which is lower than what it would normally be. You basically alert drivers that they need to slow down, and that's enforceable as well. But to actually put in a physical element, which is there permanently, regardless of the situation, it's not what, again, the purpose of this program.
How would a speed hump? I was going to ask a leading question, and I'm not I don't want to ask a leading question. Would a speed bump affect any agricultural use or businesses driving with whatever equipment they might have?
We haven't heard from the ag community about it. They're here in the audience. They might want to weigh in.
Perhaps.
I would say the biggest concern we hear from the agriculture community is really about the width, especially some of the bridges, and the tree canopy and impacting of the equipment, because it's large, oversized equipment that has to traverse these. That's primarily what we hear. And, on the one hand, with the placement of the speed hump, it's interesting that the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee is recommending to add this, because normally we have a challenge when we are changing the character of the road, and they traditionally have been opposed to those things. And I just want to point out that, while it would be great to have a tool in the toolbox that we could deploy, it is going to come with pavement markings. It is going to come with signing, and it's going to be modern pavement markings and modern signing that, perhaps, might not be consistent with the character of a rustic or exceptionally rustic road. So it really is you're trying to pit the preservation versus the...
Right, that's exactly it. I understand that, and that's why this is not an easy one to grapple with, but adding speed bumps on rustic roads is not something that most people would think of, right, as a way to slow down. Okay.
Michael, are speed bumps the only treatment that would achieve Andrew's goals of making drivers pay attention and realize there's some road element coming up, like a Ford or something else that they need to pay attention to? I was in the Patuxent Wildlife Refuge yesterday, and they have rumble strips. And my 8-year-old asked me, Dad, why do they have rumble strips? And I had to say something less eloquent than Andrew said about, well, that makes people pay attention, probably slow down. Even though it wasn't a windy road, it was the type of road where a lot of drivers' eyes would leave the road, I think, and be looking at the scenery. And they had rumble strips throughout, all the way to Powder Mill Road. But what about that, or some other treatment?
Well, the simple answer to your question, Chair Hucker, is that yes, we do have other tools in our toolbox. The matter is that our other tools are hyper modern, flashing lights, high reflectivity, things like that. And
right, we're not going to put a hawk signal.
Yeah, they militate against the character of the rustic road.
But is that more consistent with the rural character you're seeking to maintain?
What, the flashing lights?
No. What about rumble strips? They have them in the wildlife refuge.
Yeah, there's nothing in here which would prevent DOT putting in rumble strips.
If you'll allow me to speak on that, though, again, if you're talking about rustic roads and the radial character of the surrounding area, rustic roads are rumble strips are highly intrusive, very loud. So if you're worried about wildlife or nature, then those things have to go.
They're worse than a speed bump? More intrusive?
They absolutely are.
Okay.
Sir.
This is not my area of expertise, maintaining bucolic character of roads. Is there anything else that you'd be happy with besides this, unhappy with besides the speed bump that would achieve these goals?
Well, I haven't really frankly thought of anything else. All I'm saying is that all I'm responding to is the speed hump issue.
Right, you just don't want speed bumps.
Yeah, so, it's,
I tried.
Yep.
I think I would let them put them in as needed. I mean, it's for safety. Bottom line, and just because you're in a rural setting doesn't mean safety techniques aren't appropriate. And I think I don't know. I would allow it.
If the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee is open to speed bumps, recognizing how that might change the character of the roads they're there to advocate for, I'm comfortable allowing it.
well, can I suggest then that should also apply to country roads? Because they have probably, if anything, a higher speed, and they're also the same function, it's just that they're not historic nature.
No?
If you're worried about speed, same issue. I'm serious.
I don't agree with
I'm
that.
just trying to be
I
consistent.
only want to take up what's here.
Because we don't have a recommendation.
Yeah, there's no recommendation, and I understand a broader argument that's trying to be made, but let's leave that for another time.
Well, Glenn has a point. Rustic roads are few and far between, relatively speaking, right?
Right,
Country roads are more common.
yes.
So,
There's the road.
if we think it's a safety issue, it's one that should be available in either setting. I wouldn't overdo it, but I don't see why that couldn't be allowed.
I asked our farmers earlier, what this impact would be, and I think that opening it up to another set of roads would definitely warrant their input, which is why I'm happy to have this conversation at another time when we have more community input.
And we could certainly solicit their feedback as we proceed through, this process.
Mr. Hooker?
Okay, I mean, I think you make a good point. I'm happy to have that move forward with a better process in the future.
Okay,
All right.
so right now, just rustic and exceptional rustic roads. Okay.
Country?
Okay, the last set of issues have to do with recommendations regarding the rustic roads portion of the law. I do want to draw your attention very quickly to the last comment on page 5. There are a couple of technical points that the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee is making. One is to change the wording, which refers to the history of vehicle and pedestrian accidents on the road. The favored term now in Vision Zero lingo is crashes, not accidents, so they would recommend changing that term to crashes. And also, there's a mistake, and that at one point refers to the RAC as a commission, but it's a committee, so just change the word to committee. Presumably your committee's okay with all those changes. Hearing no objection. The other two issues, though, have to do with the requirements for membership to the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee. And on this one, you probably want to hear both from the Advisory Committee Chair as well as from the Office of Agriculture or the Agricultural Preservation Advisory Board. But currently there's 7 members of the board, and see the bottom of page 4 how they're allocated. 3 are owner-operators of commercial farmland earning 50% or more of their income from farming. One of them is a representative of the Agricultural Advisory Committee. One member knows rural preservation techniques through practical experience. One member knows roadway engineering through practical experience and training. One member who represents civic associations located in the agricultural reserve, and one member who represents civic associations in areas located outside the agricultural reserve. The Rustic Roads Advisory Committee recommends adding 2 at-large members. In other words, they could be picked from any category. They could be farmers, they could be civic associations, inside, outside, they could be anybody. The idea is to try to get more people on the boards because there's really more work for them to do. Sometimes they have problems with attendance, and they need to have a quorum. The Agriculture Advisory and Preservation Advisory Board, there's another issue too, which is the 50% rule. Apparently there's been an issue with trying to get farmers who are on the committee who pass that that requirement. Recently, I'm told that there were a couple of candidates who were rejected by the county attorney because they didn't have 50% of their income from farming. And so the idea is just to eliminate that requirement, just to basically say 3 farmers. The Agricultural Preservation Advisory Board opposes both those proposals. They believe that it would diminish the farmers' influence in the decisions made by the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee. They claim they would allow the RAC to select candidates that would keep agricultural interests in the forefront. I'm basically agreeing with the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee. First of all, the RAC does not pick the members, the county executive does, and you confirm them. So it could be anybody. If it's 2 at-large members, that could be 2 more farmers, depending on what the will is at the time. And there's nothing preventing the advisory board or the Office of the Agriculture to actually make recommendations to the executive. Here are real-life farmers, whether they're 50% or not, they've passed muster with them as to good representatives, would be good representatives on the board. And so that's why I'm recommending agreement. But I think you want to hear a little bit from both the chair of the RAC as well as the from the I don't know if it's Jeremy from the Office of Agriculture or representative from the advisory board to talk about these issues and then make a decision. And then you have the planning board. Go ahead and say what you want to say first then.
Sure. So planning opposes these changes at this time, knowing that we have the Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan underway, and hopefully that will be coming to the council in a few months. We think that this is kind of outside the scope of the primary scope of this bill, which is to implement and integrate complete streets design techniques into the code, and this pertaining to the makeup of the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee is something that can come out of the recommendations of the Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan instead.
And I guess my only objection to that is that master plans don't determine who should be on advisory committees. That's the council's role, and that's in the law. And unless you're going to come back to this law immediately after you do the Rustic Roads Advisory, they can make recommendations for sure, but it should not be part of the master plan per se, because master plans are supposed to last for 15, 20 years, and there's no reason why you can't change a law much more frequently than that. So yes, you could take this up when the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee, when the Rustic Roads Master Plan comes before the council. But then if you want to change the composition, then you'll need another bill.
Just to add that the DOT, did not propose changes to any of the advisory committees as part of this, and we concur with planning that the focus of this was to implement the Complete Streets Design Guide. We haven't taken any opportunity to investigate or figure out or vet an idea related to for any of the committees changing the rules of the membership. And so perhaps our thought was similar to planning's, is that the plan is before the board, and that could be an opportunity to get some input and take action on it at a later date. Just seemed to be a reasonable approach, a reasonable solution to DOT.
I agree with planning and DOT here, and don't think we need to make these changes at this time. So.
When is that master plan set to come before the council?
When are we going to have a board?
Touche. As staff has, ouch. As
Well
too soon,
played,
too
Mr.
soon.
Sartori.
As staff has envisioned, when do you hope? In general timeline.
Our public hearing is currently set for November 17th. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
within
so
a few
relatively
months.
soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're working to oblige with your request. But the point there being that is relatively soon, and so if we delay this for what I agree is probably a more appropriate vehicle to talk about it, it should be coming up soon. So I would defer.
Yeah, I doubt any of us are opposed to the proposed changes. We just think that's a better way to go about making them. Dr. Orland.
The last thing is, again, it depends how much time you have. I know you have another item coming up, but we do have a set of slides which describes basically the changes where there is pretty much total agreement amongst the 3 staffs If you want to spend another 10 minutes or so going through that, or do you want to go on to the next item?
Do we want to see
Again,
10 minutes of slides to
in the
summarize
planning
the
board's
agreements?
in the planning board's letter, which is in their packet last week as well as this week, they made a whole set of recommendations. Some of them are ones that are different than the bill. Some of them are ones that DOT also now agrees with. And so in all of this, I didn't cover any of that because there was a whole agreement. Most of it's fairly non-controversial. I think it's all, I think, non-controversial. But in the interest of showing it to you before it goes to full council, really next
You
week,
don't know what we're doing.
well, 2 weeks, then do you want to see it or not? Again, it has to do with your own time management here.
Could we go through the slides in like 5 to 7 minutes, maybe? I just want to be sensitive to the folks who are waiting for the next item.
So, yes, certainly we can.
Okay, great. We're pleased by the level of comedy and agreement here. This is great.
Okay, so
We'd like to be reminded of it.
Okay, I'm supposed to say something to Equan. We're starting the presentation now, so make sure it gets shown on the screens. Thank you.
all right, so the issues that are referred to in the following slides relate to the planning board's transmittal. Issue 4, which was the one that we had general concurrence on, was the interim translations for primary residential streets. In the proposed bill, the translation for primary residential streets in a country connector are identified as country connectors. And then I think this was largely a mistake in the submittal of the bill. They're fully intended to be country roads. If you actually look at the Complete Streets Design Guide, a lot of primary residential streets in the country area that are shown as country roads are the ones that we're referring to. So, next slide. Issue 5 was transition between street types. This identified some pretty complex ways of when we do these interim translations, how to change in the areas where the area types change between a downtown and a suburban area, or a town center and a suburban area, et cetera. And it was a great idea. And I think the more that we looked at it from the planning side, is we realized that a lot of these kind of decisions have already been made within existing master and sector plans. And that adding a translation on a translation doesn't serve that much purpose, and actually in some places makes it much more complicated. Issue 8, related to curb radii. This one really was just adding some specific language, and I think there is there we go. So the planning board felt like there needed to be some specific language that was much more consistent with the way the curb radius discussion was dealt with within the Complete Streets Design Guide. So all of these items track much, in fact, actually exactly word for word with what's in the Complete Streets Design Guide. Oh, and that's the clean version. And then the planning board did identify 10 minor changes, and most of them there were no, there was concurrence on them. They're sort of identified here. There was some clarifying language talking about some master plan side paths, and you can see the language proposed there in red.
Actually, this is Andrew Bossi, DOT. I think we did disagree still on that last bullet there, where it's any sidewalk or any side path that is not master plan. Our concern is just that word master plan in particular. We can pretty easily say we want sidewalks everywhere in master plans. And if we do that, then it pretty much nullifies this line, the 25,000 square feet, because there's always going to be a master plan sidewalk. This ties back into the earlier discussion about fee in lieu. We'd rather not get these sidewalks that are potentially sidewalks to nowhere, and rather get a fee in lieu that we can use elsewhere where it makes more sense.
Keep going? Okay. And we had several others, and the most important one, I think, was the last minor issue, which was the recommendation was just to add the planning board into the decision-making process for when sidewalks are located in environmentally sensitive areas, to basically make it a joint decision.
And the next one's the definition of protected intersections.
And that's the next slide. Yeah, the next slide, planning staff had identified a definition for protected crossing, and then DOT countered with a probably a more concise and more specific one, which we all agree is better. And that would be proposed in chapter 40, would be included in chapter 49, but it's an item that's referenced in the chapter 50 changes as well. And I think that's it.
It wasn't even 5 minutes. That was great.
Okay, thank you. So this will be on the council's agenda on October 25th.
Excellent. We have an approved bill. Thanks, everybody, for all your hard work going into this, planning and DPS and DOT. Very much appreciated. Dr. Orland and Ms. Nadeau, we know Dr. Orland got all the glory here, but thanks for all your hard work on this as well. Glenn, do we need to vote on the final bill? We didn't. No. Let's wait for the council vice president. Maybe we need a parliamentarian. Welcome. Thanks for waiting. Why don't we start, and we can add Councilmember Glass when he's back. We can just take a quick vote, right? Okay. We're back. Okay. Council Vice President, will one of my colleagues please move approval of the final bill, since I cannot? As amended?
So moved, as amended.
Okay, all those in favor of Bill 2422? I just closed it. As amended, raise your hand. Great. Are we good? Okay. No one's going to jail. Mr. Levchenko, please take us through the amendments to the Comprehensive Water Supply and Sewage Systems Plan. Thank you for your comprehensive memo as usual. Gentlemen,
sure.
Thank you for joining us.
We have 6 category changes on the schedule today. 5 of them were previously deferred, and 1 is a current request. They're all coming back at this time because they were intertwined with some of the discussion regarding the 10-year water and sewer plan, which the committee had on September 12th and October 3rd. Some of the changes there affect the decisions in these, so that's why they're coming back. I have some slides here that help sort of get us through the outline of this and help it hopefully make sense. The first 2 requests that you'll note, Transquest LLC and Travilla Oak LLC, they were sort of treated as a package because they were adjacent to each other, would require similar sewer extensions, and were also advocated by folks together. So I've listed Transquest first, and then we'll see Travilla Oak. But you'll notice the property located on Travilla Road on the northeast corner of the intersection with Glen Road and Potomac. The current use is a single-family home dating back to the 19th century. The property is known as the Old White House and Barn, so that may be some of the literature you've seen on it is calling it the Old White House. The proposed use with sewer would be, and also a designation of a multi-use water system, would be as a country inn and restaurant. And as I've noted, the low-pressure sewer extension needed is about a little over a mile long along Trevilla Road. And I have a picture I'll show you in a minute of that. As we talked about in the 10-year plan discussion, when WSSC water staff were here, there are some issues with that low-pressure system that will need to be worked out. Trevilla Oak, located catty corner to the old White House property. It's currently a shopping center, and the owner would like to redevelop the existing shopping center with sewer, and as noted here, it would require a similar low-pressure sewer extension. Now, I did want to clarify, if both properties do move forward, they would both have to have their own sewer extensions. WSSC Water does not allow non-residential uses to share low-pressure sewer extensions. So they could share the construction and the site work and similar work like that, but you would actually have two separate pipes, one treating one property, one treating the other property. And this is just a brief map to sort of align you where we are. This is Glen Road, and this is Trevilla Road here, and you see the two properties across the street from each other. And then the next picture, this a little bit small, but the properties are up here. This shows the sewer extension that would be needed to connect to a gravity main further down. So this is the low pressure sewer extension that would be needed. So just some background on what's happened with these requests so far. The Executive and Planning Board had both recommended denial of the requests because they were inconsistent with the Potomac Subregion Master Plan and Water and Sewer Plan policies. I will note that at the time of the Planning Board denial, they had noted their support for the redevelopment for both redevelopment projects and supported the council finding a way to make them work. But under the current policies, they did not see a way to do that. The council, based on, I think, heavily on what the Planning Board said, also supported looking at this again and deferred both requests pending consideration of a special policy that could be considered in the Water and Sewer Plan for commercial uses outside the planned sewer envelope. And in fact, that's what the committee did in its September 12th and October 3rd meetings. It discussed a potential commercial sewer policy and came to agreement on October 3rd with a policy that would, based on those conditions, allow consideration of these two properties. In fact, I've just noted that here. Now, based on the committee's action to date, council staff's recommendation is for a conditional approval of these two requests, and I've noted the two conditions there. First, as with any requests that are affected by the 10-year plan, we would need the 10-year plan to be first approved by the council, and then it would have to go to the Maryland Department of the Environment for final action. So it'd be conditioned on the commercial sewer service policy surviving that process in a way that would allow these properties to move forward. And the other is that planning board approval of a preliminary subdivision plan, if applicable, which conforms substantially with the concept plans that were included in the applicant's request. And those concept plans are actually in the packet. You can see those. And that's similar to what's required for private institutional facilities. You may recall when those come to the council, typically they involve some kind of preliminary plan, and the council requires concept plans for those and that they adhere substantially to those plans. So that's the first two requests. So let me step back and see if the committee has any questions about those.
I just want to thank you for all the work that you put into this. It's been very methodical, careful, and I think it's a great outcome. So we look forward to seeing it to conclusion. Thanks to all.
Any other questions?
Agreed.
All right, the next requests. We have another pair of requests I'm going to go through. They were also similarly deferred last year. First is the Aurora request. It's an RE2 zone property on Boswell Lane in Potomac. It's currently a single-family home, and the applicant is seeking to connect to the abutting main to the property to serve the existing home. It is eligible under the Water and Sewer Plan abutting mains policy, and in fact, this portion of the request was already approved by the council. However, the applicant had also requested a main extension as part of this to better align the main with the frontage of the house. Now, this is not needed from an engineering standpoint. WSSC Water says they can connect to the main where it currently exists. But if it were to be more directly in front of the house, then it has an implication for the other property that we're going to discuss, which is the Kapoor property. Under that main extension, the Kapoor property would also then abut and be eligible for a connection. So what the council did last year, wait, that's Kapoor. Well, let's go over Kapoor real quick. Kapoor is across the street from Aurora. It's also currently a single-family home, and they're seeking service for the current home. However, they do not currently abut a main. As I mentioned earlier, they would need that 140-foot extension to abut the main. So they were not eligible. The council was sympathetic to the fact that this property was the last house on the block that would not be served if Aurora was served, and deferred the request pending a review of the abutting mains policy in the 10-year plan. So these are the two requests, just to orient you. This is Boswell Lane. The Aurora request is on the south side, and the Kapoor request is on the north side. The existing main stops right about here, so it already abuts the Aurora property, but it does not abut the Kapoor property. The main extension would bring it to about here, and you can see this graphic here showing where the main extension would go. And then it would have a more direct line, back up. It would have a more direct line to the Aurora house, but it would also then abut the Kapoor property. So I mentioned with the Kapoor request that it was deferred, but as part of its October 3rd recommendations on the 10-year plan, the committee was supportive of allowing limited extensions under the abutting mains policy. And based on that, if that recommendation were to carry through the full council and once again to MDE, then the language not allowing the extension in the Aurora request can now be approved, and the Kapoor request could also be recommended for approval as well under that. And then similarly with the as with the prior requests, we would condition these approvals on the abutting mains language being affirmed by MDE, and then also in this case, because the Aurora request is the one that is requesting the extension, they would have to actually pursue that issue and make that happen in order for Kapoor then to move forward. So we've noted that in the language for the Aurora and Kapoor requests. So with that, I'll see if the committee has any questions regarding those two requests.
Good. I think we're good.
Okay. The next request, it's an individual request, the Anane request. This is also an abutting mains issue. It was deferred last year as well. This has to do with an outlot and a adjacent property that, owned by the same applicant. The issue was whether the outlot by itself is not eligible under the abutting mains policy because the prior to its subdivision, another lot associated with that subdivision got the approval. So under the traditional abutting mains approach, the outlot is not eligible. However, because the applicant also owns a contiguous property that is eligible for an abutting main, the issue came up that there would potentially be a way for these properties to re-subdivide and for the outlot then to become eligible, effectively transferring the abutting mains rights from the applicant's current property that is eligible and the outlot. Rather than go through all that, the committee was, or the council was amenable to considering a potential policy revision in the 10-year plan that would allow for the transfer of abutting mains rights, if you will, between properties under limited conditions. And so at its October 3rd meeting, the committee went through those conditions and supported an abutting mains revision that would allow for the transfer under certain circumstances, including this circumstance, the inane property. So staff is recommending, based on that recommendation, that conditioned on MDE approval of that language and confirmation that the outlot can be converted to a building lot, that those conditions, if those conditions are met, then this could move forward. With that, I'll see if the committee has any questions about that request.
This goes without saying, but the existing building is on septic.
The existing lot that is eligible for sewer is on septic. And that's a good point I didn't mention, but in the policy for this, that property would have to be, the septic system would have to be confirmed to be in well-functioning order with all sufficient, meeting all current conditions, and having a accepted septic reserve area, so that we would not be coming back in the near future with a septic failure on that property and effectively having two properties served when the intent is really to have one property served by sewer. So there is language in that draft policy that tries to protect that element of this transfer, so that we're not backing into more connections than were assumed.
So we're creating a policy allowing the transfer.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, there really is no policy that would allow it to be done in a manner that's consistent with our existing policies, right? It would simply
Right.
just be granting someone sewer because they've asked for it, rather than doing according to a policy.
Right. The outlot is currently not eligible.
Right.
As I mentioned, there might be in a particular type of re-subdivision where a portion of that property is blended with a portion of the other property, the applicant could then effectively say, well, this is the lot that I now want my sewer on, and then the other portion of it would not be. But rather than go through that, which is a complicated, burdensome process, I think that the committee was comfortable with the idea of just coming up with conditions that would provide that flexibility, but also provide some security that we're not allowing an extra connection, at least in the short term, and that the existing property does have to have a well-functioning septic system. So it achieves the same end as a re-subdivision under the right circumstances would, but other than that, there's not any other way to just simply approve sewer to the outlot.
I mean, that's the key point I wanted to make, is that there's no other way to allow for that. So, short of not following our own rules and creating all kinds of problems, this is a very practical solution that
Right.
allows the homeowner to do something.
And that's the other sort of general issue. Everything we do does have to ultimately be approved by the Maryland Department of the Environment, and they also refer our approved amendments to the Maryland Department of Planning, and they look at our policies, they look at our master plans, and determine whether what we have in fact approved is consistent with our own policies and plans. And over time, there have been requests or approvals by us that have been denied by the state because we did not meet our own policies. We were trying to make an exception. We may have had very good reasons for the exception, but it was seen as an exception outside of an established policy, and the Maryland Department of the Environment has denied those on occasion. So it is important that we try to make the policies accomplish what we want them to accomplish. And if we see cases that come up like these that are odd cases that have that we feel have some merit, rather than approve them as exceptions, what we generally do is bring them back as policy discussions later and try to identify a policy that we can make going forward that addresses those requests, but also deals with potential future requests that might occur.
Thank you for that helpful summary. That was great. Thanks.
So the last request, this is the only one that was not deferred, is the Mojave request. And I've got some of the basic information here. It's about a 5.2 acre RE2 zoned property on Centurion Way near McCrossan Lane and Travilla Road in Potomac. The applicant is seeking public sewer to serve as existing single-family home. And you have heard in some of the written testimony and public hearing testimony about difficulties the applicants had with his septic system, which we can talk about in a minute. But let me go through sort of the process that's occurred for this request so far. So the applicant is seeking public sewer to serve the existing single-family home. WSSC Water has identified two options for how to serve the property, both from the same location, depending on whether you serve the northern part of the property or the southern part of the property, and I'll show a picture in a minute. The southern part of the property is only about 70 feet away from the existing main. The northern part of the property, because of the odd nature of it, which I'll show you, would make it about a 900-foot extension. But the key issue is this would be from the low-pressure sewer in the Palatine development. And that's very important when we're talking about the peripheral sewer policy in Potomac, which the council has approved a number of requests under that over the years for properties that are adjacent to or confronting the existing envelope. However, that policy, as noted in the master plan and reflected in the 10-year water and sewer plan, specifically restricts properties around the Palatine low-pressure sewer system from connecting. So we have a policy restriction, meaning that service to this property under that policy would not be consistent with that policy. So that creates a policy issue. And we did discuss the policy as part of the 10-year plan update, and the concern with opening that up is, one, WSSC Waters has raised some broader capacity issues and service issues if that restriction were to be lifted. And based on that, the committee was comfortable with DEP and WSSC Water looking at those capacity issues. DEP staff said that would take a few months, and they could come back and look at that. So the committee did not make any recommendations to modify the peripheral sewer policy at this time. So under that recommendation, this request would not be eligible under that policy. Now, I spoke earlier about the applicant's concerns about the septic system itself, and that it was requiring significant maintenance and upkeep. He provided information to the council through the public hearing and written testimony, and has communicated with council staff about that as well. But what we don't have before us is information from our Department of Permitting Services, who is responsible for identifying and documenting these failed systems and making recommendations about a permanent solution. So I've suggested to the applicant that they work closely with DPS and with DEP to identify whether, as he feels that the system is failing, if DPS agrees with that, and then also agrees that the best long-term solution is to connect to the nearby sewer, then this request could follow a different path. It could follow through on the policies we have for dealing with documented failed septic systems, and that actually can be approved administratively by DEP on an expedited nature if necessary, going forward with WSSC Water. But what we don't have before us today is that documentation from permitting services. So staff's recommendation, based on the committee's work on October 3rd and this issue of uncertainty about or not having any information from DPS, is to defer this request pending the further study by DEP and WSSC Water. But certainly, if in the interim, if the issue of the septic system itself arises, then it could then move forward on a different track and a more expedited track through DEP. So that's sort of the crux of it with the Mojave request, and we have DEP folks here to answer any questions you have on that one as well.
Right. Do we have anybody here from Permitting Services?
We had, you may recall from October 3rd,
I
we did have Heidi Benham, who's
Yeah.
the head of Well and Septic. She was
I know.
not able to attend today, unfortunately.
And nobody else in that agency is here?
Not that I'm aware
case.
of today. I know we had someone earlier for the earlier item, but that was not his area of expertise.
No, of course not. Is there only one person at DPS? Or
It's a section.
Right. So there's no other staff there that could join the committee today?
Well, she is the program manager
I
for
understand.
that, and is
Right.
the other folks, I believe, are more operational. She is the right person to come and speak to this.
And not their government affairs staff either? Nobody's here? Okay.
But like I said, the process regarding failed systems is its own track, and
Yes.
it does not have to wait
That's right.
for the 10-year plan or this study by WSSC and DEP. That's a well-established process. The DEP and the council have approved many requests
Many?
through that.
That's right.
But the key is that we have that review by DPS. They make that
Right,
assessment.
but they didn't show up today.
Well, they don't have information on this property today.
That's the problem to me. Where is DPS? Where's their government relations? Where are their staff? They have a history with this property. We have a whole committee here
Well-
ready to make a decision.
Well, DPS does not have a history with this property. They need to work with the applicant to move forward on it.
The applicant's been in touch with DPS.
The applicant worked through DEP, but Alan, do you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, you may recall when Ms. Benham was here on October 3rd, she did have some copies of records of addressing concerns with the septic system.
Right.
And at that time, she looked through those, she reviewed the specifics of those, and could not make a determination that there was a septic system failure.
Yes.
And so when Ms. Benham returns, I will work with her to meet with the applicant and sort out the details of what's going on with that system, why it requires so much maintenance. But again, I would need DPS to determine that there is a failure.
Right. No, we understand that.
And then if that is the case, then we can charge ahead very quickly and request or make a determination that service is possible, and that WSSC does not need to wait for a category change, a category change in order to connect the property to public sewer and build the extension that's needed.
Right. Mr. Mohebi, do you want to come up and remind us what you're dealing with at your property? Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity. Councilmember Hucker, Rimmer, Glass. We bought this house in 2018 while it was under construction. It's a brand new house. The construction was completed in 2019. The final inspection was July 9, 2019. We moved into the property mid-July 2019. Within 4 months after we moved into the property, the septic system backed up into the house. We called the builder and said that the septic is backing into the house. They sent the septic system installers, the company that installed the septic system. They came and checked the system. They said that there are 2 pumps there and some switches and connectors, and all of them have burned out, and they have to replace all of them. They replaced everything, cost several $1,000s. They gave us the good news that it was still under warranty, so we didn't have to pay the initial cost of replacing everything. But they told us the warranty ends at the end of November 2019, which was 30 days apart. We were not worried at that point because we said everything is brand new now, so we had no concern. By end of January 2020, the septic backed up into the house again.
Could you pull the microphone a little closer? Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
By end of January 2020, just another 3 months passed, the septic system backed up into the house again. We called the company that had been there. They said that it's past the warranty, so they don't maintain it anymore, and they gave us a different company that has been coming there ever since. They came and they said the pumps are burned up again and the connectors, and they replaced it. And this happened several times during 2020, and you've seen some of the bills. 3 times in 2020 they had to replace the connectors and the pumps. It got to a point that we were so worried all the time that this is going to happen. They came and installed an alarm system that will, alarm goes off, a loud sound and a red light, that if we're in the shower, we have to stop, we have to shut off the washer, whatever is in use, we have to cut it off immediately so it doesn't back up completely into the house. And then they explained to us the issue. As he explained, this property on paper shows 5.17 acre land, but if you look at the drawing, the 3.85 acre of it is conservation area. It's fenced off, and it's all trees they put in that area, and we're not allowed to even enter that part of the land. So what we are left with is 1.1 acre, and the 1.1 acre is divided in 2 sections, half acre on this side and half acre 700 feet apart. And the house is on the small portion on the top, the half acre. They ran a line in that narrow part behind the neighbor's house to the other part where the septic sand mount is. And they're saying the reason, there's 5 houses brand new built in that section. It's called Sutton Addition to Palatine. Those 5 houses, my wife is the chairman of the HOA for these 5 houses. None of them have this issue. None of them are interested to connect to sewer line. This is the only property that is failing, and the reason is because the way they divided the land and the 700-foot connection that takes from septic tank all the way to where the septic mount is. And every time there's a thunderstorm, the pumps burn, the switches burn, and everything stops working. So they said the only way you can fix this, connect to the sewer line, so you don't have a reservoir to back up into your house. Because every time you use something, it directly goes get to the sewer line, and you will not have an issue. We bought this house brand new. We put our life saving into a house. We were excited, but ever since we've had issue 6 times a year, sometimes more often. And I'm not an expert in septic system. Maybe I'm somewhat of an expert in transportation, but I don't know nothing about septic. But I know when it backs up into my house and I have to pay thousands of dollars just to keep it from backing into the house, it's got to be a reason for that. And the reason the other properties don't have the issue, the other 4 houses, because their septic mount and the septic field is right behind their houses, works with gravity and a small pump, and they have never had the issue. But by the way this land was just uniquely divided, the issue has arose. Now the septic line is 70 feet away from where the septic mount is right now. And WSSC said they can connect it. Of course, it's not cheap. They said it's about $550 to $600 per linear foot. So it's nearly $50,000 to bring it to the edge of the property. It will cost me another $50,000 inside the property to run it to where it needs to go and the pump. So this is a $100,000 project. Trust me, if I didn't have to, I would rather spend this money somewhere else. I can spend $100,000 in much better places than put it in the sewer line. The only reason I'm in front of you is out of need and nothing else. And initially, 2 years ago, when I called, Alan answered the phone. I asked him what to do. He told me, go ahead and put the application. He helped me all the way through the process. I never heard about this other process that Keith was mentioning today. He and I talked earlier today, and he mentioned it today to me. This was the first time ever I've talked to Keith. I've never met Alan, but I've talked to him and emailed back and forth probably 10 or 15 times. He had never mentioned to me that I need to go this other route. So that's why I'm here in front of you, and I beg you please to end this misery that we have dealt with all this time we've been in a brand new house and not being able to enjoy it. And I appreciate your time. I know you're concerned about many more important things than one Dinkley house on a Dinkley road with septic problem, but that's our life saving into this property.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
And going back to the beginning, of course, the county council and the planning department approved the zoning here. The WSSC and DPS approved the septic system in the first place and thought this would work. And you've had the backup many times. You've incurred thousands of dollars in costs to mitigate it. And you're here because you're willing to invest your family's money in the sewer extension that would protect not just your family, but the community.
Yes, sir. And by the way, between the last manhole and our property, there is no other property.
Right.
It would not affect anybody else. Nobody else will benefit from it. Nobody else can tap into it. The last manhole is my neighbor's who has already connected to sewer line. So it's our property, it's very next one. And as I explained, it's very expensive, but we have no choice. We can't
Right.
use our house unless we do this.
Right. And DPS has certified many other similar systems as failing, but hasn't yet certified your system as failing. And you talked to Mr. Sokop about this, but you said he didn't explain.
I have
that
never
DPS
heard
can-
about DPS until 45 minutes ago when Keith mentioned to me. I had never heard it. Alan never brought it up. I thought this was the only way because I didn't even know about category change. I
Yeah.
initially went to WSSC and applied to connect. They said no problem, we'll take care of it. And then they contacted me about 3-4 weeks later, and they said, hey, David, we can't do it because you have to ask for category change from the county.
Right.
I never knew about this stuff. As I said, I'm not an expert in this. I know a lot about transportation, but nothing
Right.
about septic. So this is how I got educated as we were going in the last 2 years. And
Yeah, that's the much more expensive solution, obviously. Having DPS just certify what seems to be obvious that it's a failing system is the normal way. Mr. Sukop, you didn't explain that that's the normal course of business when you talked to Mr.
I
Mojave?
initially explained that we would ask DPS to evaluate what the situation was, but short of actually having DPS designated as a failed system, I don't offer that to the applicant if I don't know that it's a realistic possibility.
You don't explain that that's the normal process?
Yes,
Setting
if-
aside,
if-
not that you're,
if it's
not-
a-
well,
if
just to be
it's
clear,
a-
that no one's asking you to certify, to do DPS's job and assess that as a failing system or a
Right.
success, or a successful system, but why wouldn't you tell a taxpaying resident that that's the normal process? That's the requirement.
Again, because if we don't have something from DPS that says it is a failing system, then we offer, I don't want to say a false hope, but something that can't be accomplished until we have input from DPS on the property. When we got the input from DPS on this property, it was that there's some problems, but it's not a failing system.
Right.
Because they don't have to replace the tank, they don't have to replace the drain fields.
nobody ever called me, nobody ever showed up at the property. How did they assume that?
I just want to pick up on that point. So what does it take for the system to be failing? You just shared the tank and
The drain fields.
and the drain fields, but the constant other aspects that have been mentioned, does that not rise to the level of failure?
At least at this point, not to DPS. Again, the problems that have been going on are things that can be replaced, mechanical things, physical things that can be replaced in the system. The system as a whole has not failed. Now, this is a very unusual situation. And as Mr. Mojave said, he has about a 700-foot outfall from the septic tank to where the drain fields are. And I would like to get both DPS and their septic contractor out to look at the situation and make some determination about whether this is indefinite or whether there is some other fix, maybe enlarging the outfall pipe so the pumps don't have to work as hard.
I agree with you that this is a very unusual situation,
Yeah.
and I think that this committee is on record saying that we prefer to follow the procedures and the policies, and not open up any other can of worms. But hearing Mr. Mojave, your very compelling, genuine, and sincere testimony about what you're experiencing, we have to have this conversation, and we have to figure out how he can continue living with his family under a situation which, by my account, would constitute a failing septic system.
I hate to put Alan on the spot. He has been very helpful. Every time I call him, within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, he calls me back, he emails me back. But he never ever mentioned this other route that we needed to go. If there were any process that needed to be done, he told me they were going to do it on their own. To come to the final hearing, this has dragged on 2 years now. I've been at 3 public hearings, and I've been at several T&E meetings. To come to the last day, and today I had a conversation with Keith, and he mentioned this other route, but I would say it's on them. I ask you and I beg you to approve the category change so I can get my contractors to go along with WSSC. This is one property, one house, and one dinky little street on one corner. Will not affect anything or anybody else. It would not open up a pack of worms. It would not change the valuation of my property. I'm putting $100,000 into the sewer line that I would never get it back. At least I can live in my house and enjoy the investment that we've made, our lifetime saving to buy a house. I never knew about this when I bought the house. I had houses before that they had septic system, was much cheaper than having a sewer line, because every 5 years we would call somebody and come pump the septic system for a couple of $100 and we were done. To have this much expenditure, and the first time they came, it was $6,000-7,000 that they didn't even charge us. They said that first time was covered by warranty. Since then, I've spent $4,000 or $5,000 a year, and it's continuation of fear of not being able to take a shower, knowing if the alarm is going to go off or not. In the middle of your shower, alarm goes off and you have to run out.
Is it correct? Is Mr. Mojave correct in saying that an extension would not affect or be accessible by any of his neighbors?
There is one house directly across the street adjacent to Palatine that could become eligible for a sewer connection under the abutting mains policy. When you have a low pressure sewer like this extension would be, you have to, according to WSC, you have to make a connection to that line that is perpendicular to the line. And WSSC has to have that connection run straight to the property line. So depending on the angle of the extension, it could serve only Mr. Mojave's property. It might also serve this one across the street. Now, if the longer extension, the 900-foot extension were built, which would be substantially more expensive, obviously, then the other 3 lots in the subdivision could, in theory, become eligible for service under the abutting mains policy.
My wife is the chairman of the HOA for these 5 houses. We talked to the other 4. None of them are interested. They don't want to spend $50,000, $60,000. They have no issue whatsoever. The other property that he's mentioning, if you look at the drawing where the line is, every single one of those houses are already connected to the sewer line. There is no other property. The very next property is our property. So there's none other than ours. The one across from us that he's mentioning, there is no house there. That's just field that it's the part of the house that it's one of the new houses on the southern edition of Palatine, which is part of our HOA, and they're not interested. They do not want to connect to the sewer line. In fact, I asked them, I thought maybe I could share the expenses with them, and every one of them said, David, we're not interested, we have no issue, so go ahead and take care of it for your own.
And so, Mr. Levchenko, just bringing it back home, the decision points are?
Well, today, based on the committee's discussion of just going back to the policy issue with the peripheral sewer policy, the committee did not recommend any change to that policy, so that doesn't provide a policy justification here. What that leaves us with is the failed septic issue, which needs more work by DEP and DPS to verify that. If we were to go forward and say we feel there's a compelling case and we want to recommend approval, then we are vulnerable to, once again, revisiting of that by MDE, which they have done in the past, where we don't have a documented situation as we normally do with many of these other requests. We could be open to the amendment being rejected by MDE based on their review of our own policies.
Okay, none of us are harmed by that. Only Mr. Mojave is harmed by more delay.
There's one application in front of
So-
you that you need to make a decision. I'm not asking to change the entire policy. This is not part of the master plan of water and sewer plan of Montgomery County. I'm not asking you to change anything. It's one property, if I would sign a guarantee that none of the other property, I can even get petition from them. None of them is interested in sewer if you need that. But I'm telling you, there will be nobody else. It will not affect, this is a dead-end street, it's a cul-de-sac. It won't affect anything in this Montgomery County whatsoever. I pay $50,000 a year, $50,000 in property tax for property I can't even use. That's pathetic.
Right. To me, this is a prime example of why so many people routinely just say they hate government, because they see well-paid professionals who seem to have bring no relief and no creative solutions to the table when they're faced with a resident who is willing to spend many thousands of his own dollars simply to keep his own family safe and his neighborhood safe. So that makes no sense to me. Well, I'm just
And I
one second.
followed their
But-
guidance.
I understand. But DPS has certified many systems as failing, more than we know about, and there's no testimony to that here. DEP, since I've been on this committee for 8 years, we've approved more category changes than I can count. We just approved more. And in this case, we were all here 2 weeks ago, and I asked DEP and DPS to go out to Mr. Mojave's house to do something council members do routinely, look at the property, put your thinking caps on, and come up with a creative solution to bring some relief to a homeowner facing a public health emergency, essentially. And in 2 weeks, DEP's now there's no new information you're bringing to the table, and DPS didn't bother to show up, just blew us off. So that's frustrating, if you can't tell, to at least this council member, because I don't see anybody in the executive branch actually trying to provide basic constituent service on a public health matter. But we hear a lot of rhetoric about rules that were put in place by people who aren't here, and not any focus on relief for a family that's facing a sewage backup. So why has nobody been to his house in 2 weeks since we had this hearing, and there's no new information before the committee?
We were not able to schedule a time to go out to his house that was workable for both departments. And as I mentioned to you in my email previously, our time has been largely taken up with other priorities. I know that doesn't help Mr. Mojave, but we've been trying to get information for the council, for the committee, on a variety of topics. And the primary one being the update of the water and sewer plan. And we know that is time sensitive and must be completed by October 25th.
I've been working in this county for 43 years, in transportation. I provide accessible transportation to the needies in this county. I transport anybody over age of 70 for free out of my pocket. I've done everything. I'm a commissioner here in the county on the Transportation Commission. I volunteer my time. I've done everything I could have done on my side. They never bothered to pick up the phone and tell me, okay, we're coming to at least look at what
That's
you're
right.
talking about.
I think that's inexcusable.
Okay.
And I'm
So-
absolutely in agreement.
So I asked you to go ahead and approve it, put it in their face. That's all I can tell you.
I'd like to move that we make the category change to accommodate this unfortunate one-off situation where remedies have been tried to be made, but they're not been able to, and where it seems that there will be no other cascading effect.
Thank you.
Is there a policy that this could be achieved that is consistent? What's the,
Well,
The category change is an exception to a policy.
it's an exception to a policy.
Right.
well,
That's what's on the
Well,
table.
I don't know if that's,
the category changes that, well, the category changes you see tend to be the more difficult category changes. Many category changes are approved administratively by DEP because they're consistent with a policy. There's no underlying issues or controversy, and they get approved and the council doesn't see them. The ones that come to the council tend to have some issue associated with them. So, you know, the ones you see are the more difficult ones. Now, this one, it came to the council as a policy issue with the peripheral sewer policy, but it's morphed into a septic system failure issue. Now, that, as I said, that policy can be expedited, moved very quickly. It doesn't rely on all the other processes. You don't have to have a new category change request and a new public hearing and notice and all that. As DEP mentioned, if that's documented by DPS,
a failure.
they have very quick.
That's the core issue,
process.
is that the homeowner says there's a failure, and that has to be validated. It's possible that it's not actually a failure that can't be fixed. And we would
Councilmember
be here
Rivera.
today approving the connection for this home, which would lead to the connection for other homes, based on an assertion that it can't be fixed, which we do not know if that's true.
Councilmember
That's
Leonard,
based on an assumption
you
that anybody
always-
else would
you-
apply for it.
For many years, since I've known you for many years on the council, you've always voted for what you feel is right. Think in your heart how you feel today. I'm not an expert, and I mentioned many times, I'm not an expert on septic system. Why would I spend $100,000? Why would I spend 2 years of my time and take your time, come here in front of you with this application if I didn't need to? I'm a businessman. I don't waste time. I don't waste money. And I trust me when I tell you, the only reason I'm here is out of desperation. It's not out of luxury. Now, you can vote with your heart. They failed on their staff. Nobody ever in 2 years had time to schedule a meeting to come see what we're talking about. So if you vote no, you have given them the vote that they shouldn't have had, because they failed on their part, not following their own procedure. Never ever mentioned to me this DPS route. I would have followed every step that I've come. It's what they had suggested to me, and Alan and I talked. Maybe it didn't come to his mind. Maybe
I
he was
appreciate what you're saying. I really do. The reason that we have rules is because many people have sympathetic cases. And if we want to take all of these sympathetic cases up one at a time, we can spend all of our time here doing that. I would like to find a policy that is consistent with the application, or I would like the county to document that indeed it's a failed system. And I guess I don't know that I've ever approved a request that didn't meet one of those two. If I have, then that's different. You know, I don't recall doing that. I don't know, do you? I don't.
You haven't been here long enough.
Yeah.
Only 12 years.
Yeah.
So I've been here for 12 years. I've never approved a change request that wasn't either the result of a policy that we adjusted or the result of a failed system. I don't know if that's true or not. I think it's true, but It's possible. Not.
None come
we
to
don't need a
mind.
category change. If it's a
What's
failed
that?
system, they wouldn't even be in front of us. It's a
Exactly.
category
If it's a
change.
failed system. So
Yeah,
when we
you
do
wouldn't
them,
typically see those. Or
And-
you would see
and-
them as part of the administrative process. You wouldn't have to, they
Right.
wouldn't come before the council for action.
There's dozens of cases like this that have moved forward in the last 8 years. There's
Are there?
just this one because nobody bothers to call him back or go out to his house. And he's been here 5 times.
Keith, can you give us we approve these kinds of requests on
If DPS says it's a failing system, it doesn't need a category change.
I would
It's a
rearrange the
failing
question,
system.
not whether or not we approve these requests. Are similar requests approved in general?
Yes.
Well,
if
that's why we rely on DPS.
Well,
I'm not an
well,
expert on
so-
septic systems, so.
Any request that we approve under the public health concerns policy in the water and sewer plan requires us to get confirmation from DPS that there is a failure or an imminent failure and that public sewer service is needed because there is no ability to repair or replace the system on site.
Thank you for that, and I really do appreciate Councilmember Reamer's explanation and track record of being prudent, right? And totally, and I think we all, in the decisions we've made today and previously, however long that might be, is consistent with that. But my very first question was whether or not this was deemed a failure. And the answer was no, because it didn't meet certain criteria. How many other situations have you experienced like this?
We've had at least one that I can recall, unfortunately in the Glen Hills area, where the family in the existing house complained about odors from their septic system. DPS went out and evaluated it and determined that it was likely due to the operation of the system, and it was not a septic failure. The council went ahead and approved a category change to allow them to extend and connect to sewer. We got back from the Department of the Environment in Baltimore that we had violated our policies with regard to sewer service in the Glen Hills area, and they denied the request. Since then, the family that's there has not raised any additional concerns.
And how long ago was that?
That was, what was it, Keith, it was before the master plan, wasn't it? Maybe it's right after the master plan, so maybe around 2003, 2004.
Okay, and so I, not having been here, and even Councilmember Reber not having been here at that time, if that was if there was one similar instance where the council at that time approved a change, I would argue that this is far more verifiable than mere odor, because Mr. Mohebi has the literal receipts for the efforts and the time that he has had to put into this remediation. And for those reasons alone, there seems to have been some bureaucratic breakdown which we're still trying to identify, and it might be in the original definition of what is functioning and not functioning. But I think there has to be a point in time where we recognize the burden, undue burden that he and his family are going through, and it seems that the best remedy is a category change.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Moebi, can you explain again what efforts you have taken to remedy this problem?
Sir, the problem, as you can see on the drawing, and it's really, really a unique situation. I don't think there is one more case like this in the entire Montgomery County where they had to put the septic sand mount that far away from the house, going up the hill, which is causing all these issues. So we have this other company now that comes to our house every month now, because I don't wait for the alarm to go off, because you might have guests over, the kids coming from college, and because of that we have constantly spent money with them every month, and every 2-3 months the pumps have to replace the switches. Every time there's a thunderstorm, it burns up everything. So It's constantly, and then what I did is I called WSSC, tried to connect. They told me you have to do category change. And right away I called and talked to Alan. And Alan told me, okay, fill up this application, pay us the $250 application fee. And then from there on, I just followed his guidance. Every month or so, I email him, I say, Alan, what should I do now? He says, well, just wait for his public hearing. It's coming up, and I come to the public hearing. So I've been following basically his guidance. I never ever heard one word about this DPS stuff until today. And that's honest truth.
Right. I got to pick up my family at 5. We've been going on this one case as much as I love category change hearings for quite a while. So, and this is
I'm sorry
multiple
about that.
iterations of it. So I think this one is 2-1, Keith.
Could we make a proposal, and the proposal be this, that we work with DPS, and if we can determine that it's a failure, we'll take that route, and that if we can't determine it's a failure, then we'll.
Yeah, I thought that went good without saying, but yeah, I'm sure Mr. Mohevi would prefer just a verification that what the public now knows that he has a failing system is the case.
Obviously, there's defectives. He has a defective design system. His system's not working properly.
Right, which was, of course, approved by the government.
Right.
Right.
But I guess the question is, can the system be fixed, or does it just make sense to say it's failed and move on from there?
Sure, I think he'll embrace whatever's an effective solution that saves as much money as possible. And
From what I have heard from the contractor, the system, because of the way the land is, and there's not enough space to put the septic field on the other land, and they had to carry it over, the system the design will never be fixed because of
the government's imposed other restrictions on the use of the other portion of his property. So that's part of the unique nature of this one. Okay?
So Mr. Hucker, you concurring with Mr. Glass or Councilmember Reamer?
Oh,
You said 2-1.
I'm for the category change.
Okay.
And if we don't need it, we don't need it.
So how will you proceed on the evaluation?
Well, just from a process standpoint, the category changes are scheduled to go to the council next week, the 25th. Assuming they're approved there, then they would go to MDE. We're talking, weeks, couple months before we're going to hear back from MDE. Now, during that time,
Right.
we may well conclude that that's moot.
So we have a
because-
week.
We're just granting approval that may never be used if DPS shows up for work and.
Or
Right.
even if MDE
Right.
were to, ask questions about it, we may have already resolved the issue here if it's
That's
determined to
true,
be a
too.
failed system. Now,
Yep.
if there's still some dispute over the failure of the system,
We gotta
then
go. Okay, I gotta go.
Yes.
So I will
Thank
mark
you.
myself as abstaining.
Bottom line here is, as was noted before, there was an inability for all the parties to meet on site. We now have 1 week before council makes this decision, so hopefully all parties can meet on site and we remedy this a different way.
Right. Maybe you'll make this a priority now. Thank you.
We will take it to DPS.
Thank you.
Between vehicles to accommodate longer stopping distances. Remember that Maryland